Chapter 7. Elias and the Holy City. Seeing the man in front of him lower his bow and then sheath his sword, Elias Romwell looked back at his fellow knights of Providence and waved. As they dismounted from their horses, the knights lifted up their visors, keeping their helmets on, unlike their captain. "At ease, men," announced Elias as he gestured at the mercenary. Then he nodded again. "Your name, sir?" "Garrick. Garrick Landau," replied the mercenary, shouldering his bow. Onyx trotted over to Garrick and eyed the men in front of them. Then the mystic wolf bared his teeth, not in the most menacing of ways, but enough that Elias could tell that he was far from calm. "The mystic wolf is yours. Then you have bonded. No one can command such a beautiful and noble creature if they have not," said the Knight of Providence. "We are to receive 3 of the magnificent animals as a gift from Elf Queen Ilsa Lightshower in the days to come. But to have already seen one now, and in battle, has truly been a blessing from Elion." Garrick looked over at the dead trolls. "You should thank them." Then he looked back at Elias. "Onyx is ferocious only when he needs to be. How long have trolls been near the Holy City? I have been here many times on jobs. It is not like them." Elias moved his helmet from his hand onto his hip and held it there fast with his wrist. The other knights relaxed more as well, and walked over to the dead trolls. The captain studied Garrick's appearance, noting his age, his clothes, his weaponry. "Do not worry, mercenary. They are outliers. However they made their way to the outskirts of the Holy City, they are no more now. The high priest bid us to take care of the monsters here and search the area for any others. This aggression will not stand. People are already on their way to the Holy City for the festival of Communis. Her memory will be celebrated, not sullied by death." "Captain," interrupted a calm voice. Elias looked over at one of the knights, who had broken off from the other 3 that were still studying the trolls. "The visitor's story checks out," replied the knight. Elias and Garrick looked over at a pile of bones near the tunnel exit. In all the action, they hadn't seen it. "We had no reason to think his story a lie, but at least we know the truth for certain," said Elias sorrowfully. Then he lifted his head back up and spoke loud and clear to the knight by the bones. "Stephen, when we get back, send some knights to guard this tunnel. We will have no more bloodshed before the festival starts this week." Once he was done giving orders, Elias looked back at Garrick. "We had a man entering the Holy City tell us of these trolls, and of how he and his friends were attacked. He was the only one to survive." After both Garrick and Elias looked over at the trolls, the captain of the Knights of Providence then extended his hand to the mercenary, who took it. "Though I know it was not your intention to do half of our work for us this day, I appreciate you and the Mystic Wolf taking care of them. Is there something I can do for you, Garrick, before we leave?" Garrick opened his pack and pulled out Braelin's ring. Upon seeing it, Elias's eyes widened for a moment. Then he looked up at the mercenary. "I know you know what this is," spoke Garrick. "I do. Why do you have it?" questioned Elias. Garrick was quiet for a moment. "I came upon a cleric who was being attacked by 3 bandits. He was on his way back from a pilgrimage to the catacombs of the temple ruins. I took care of his attackers, but it was too late." Elias's head turned quickly over toward the 3 knights, who had moved on from looking at the trolls to admiring Onyx from afar. "Men, Stephen and I will not be going with you on the sweep of the area. After you have surveyed the land, return and guard the tunnel. I will send others to replace you later. Understood?" "Yes, sir," replied the knights, moving their visors back into place. As they started toward their horses, Stephen joined Garrick and Elias. "Captain, what is wrong?" whispered Stephen. Garrick watched as Elias grabbed the knight's shoulder firmly. "My friend, this will not be easy to hear, but this man has news of Braelin," stated Elias in a low voice. Then Stephen looked down at the ring in Garrick's hand. "After I defeated the bandits that had attacked him, he was alive, but gravely injured," continued Garrick. "Before he died, he gave me his ring and this." Garrick grabbed the scroll from his pack. Elias went to grab it, but Garrick lowered the parchment. "I was told to only give this scroll to the high priest himself." Stephen continued to look at the ring as Elias eyed the scroll. "You do not trust me, Garrick? I know we have just met, but I am the captain of the Knights of Providence. a warrior that answers to the high priest, but to Elion above all. Garrick measured his words carefully before speaking. It is not that I do not trust you, but I gave my word. I believe you, of all people, can understand that, replied Garrick. I see, and I respect that. And I respect Brayland, said Elias in a low voice. Elias glanced over at Stephen, who was still looking at the ring in Garrick's hand. His face was pale now. Your uncle was a good man, spoke the captain as he put his arm around his fellow knight. I loved him, as did anyone who had the privilege to know him. Then Elias placed his hand on Stephen's head and brought it to the side of his own. He is with Elion now. I know he will be there to greet us when it is our time to enter his embrace. Then he let go of Stephen's head. May I have his ring, please? Whispered Stephen to Garrick, finally lifting his head. Garrick let the ring roll from his palm to his thumb and pointer finger, and placed it into the knight's hand. Then the mercenary took a deep breath. I never knew my father, Stephen. It was my uncle that helped my mother raise me, spoke Garrick calmly and with reassurance. Then he leaned his head back. This quiver I use was his. After a moment of contemplation, the mercenary continued. Brayland did not tell me who to give this to, but I have no doubt he would want you to have it. Garrick looked over at Elias and then back at Stephen, who had placed the ring onto one of his fingers. The knight wiped his eyes quickly and, still in shock, started to fidget with his mustache before placing his helmet over his long brown hair. Brayland told me this ring would grant me entry to see the high priest, began Garrick. Then he looked solely at Elias. I trust that you can arrange an audience with him. What is on this scroll, if it is to be believed, will change the world of Denaria forever. I promised Brayland I would deliver it, and that is what I plan to do today. What is on it? Asked Elias, most interested. Garrick studied Elias for a moment as he contemplated his response. He had trusted Brayland, one of the brethren. If Elion was in any of this, he could now trust this Knight of Providence. Garrick then looked out at Onyx, who had started to trot toward the holy city, which was already beginning to light up in the darkening sky. Knowledge of the location of the king priest's scepter sword, announced Garrick. Elias's eyes became big. He looked up to the sky for a moment, and then closed them. Opening his eyes again, he returned his helmet to his head. Then he placed a hand on Garrick's shoulder. Mercenary, mount up behind Stephen. You can tell us the whole story on the way. Make sure your memory is clear, replied the captain, after looking at the holy city off in the distance. Elias looked over at Stephen, who nodded back. Then the captain returned his gaze back to Garrick and finished, because you will get your audience with the high priest tonight.